Have you ever noticed that moment when you first begin to truly wake up to the vastness of reality? That simultaneously there arises a strange and unsettling distance between yourself and those who once felt so familiar. It begins subtly, perhaps with a shift in perception after a profound meditation, or following that book that somehow found its way into your hands at precisely the right moment, or maybe during that walk in nature when suddenly the veil thinned and you glimpsed something beyond the ordinary fabric of existence. At first, you might have tried to share this newfound vision with enthusiasm, only to be met with blank stares, uncomfortable laughter, or worse, concerned looks questioning your mental stability. And gradually, you realize that in your awakening, a kind of existential solitude has taken root within you, a space that widens with each new insight, each expansion of consciousness. This peculiar loneliness of the awakened mind is what we will explore today, not as a terminal condition, but as a necessary passage in the evolution of human awareness. The human being who begins to awaken undergoes a transformation not unlike that of a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. Consider the caterpillar, content in its limited perspective, inching along leaves and branches, experiencing the world through the narrow confines of its biological programming. When the metamorphosis begins, this creature dissolves almost entirely into a primordial soup within the chrysalis, its former identity completely surrendered to the mysterious intelligence of nature. If the caterpillar could maintain consciousness during this process, imagine the profound aloneness it would feel, suspended between what it was and what it is becoming, unable to communicate its experience to its still crawling former companions. The chrysalis state is precisely where many awakening humans find themselves, caught between worlds, speaking a language that the sleepwalking world cannot yet comprehend. The pain of this isolation is real and should not be minimized. You find yourself sitting at dinner tables with family or friends, listening to conversations about politics, consumer purchases, or social gossip, while something in you screams silently about the profound mystery of existence that hovers just beyond the thin film of our collective agreements about reality. You might attempt to introduce threads of deeper significance into the conversation, only to watch as they are quickly subsumed by the comfortable banality of socially sanctioned topics. Eventually, many awakening individuals simply stop trying, retreating into a silence that feels both protective and imprisoning. They learn to wear masks of normalcy, participating in the social play with diminishing authenticity, while the gulf between their inner experience and outer expression grows ever wider. This disconnection from the human collective is often misinterpreted by spiritual teachers who suggest that enlightenment is a state of perpetual bliss and harmony. What they fail to acknowledge is that genuine awakening initially creates discord rather than harmony, separation rather than unity, because you are stepping out of sync with the somnambulistic rhythm that keeps human society functioning in its current configuration. You become a cognitive dissident in a system that requires conformity of thought to maintain its coherence. The more clearly you perceive the constructed nature of social reality, the economic systems based on manufactured scarcity, the cultural narratives that limit human potential, and the religious dogmas that commodify the sacred, the more difficult it becomes to participate in these systems without a sense of existential nausea. As your perception continues to evolve, you begin to see how deeply conditioned most human behavior truly is. The people around you no longer appear fully autonomous, but rather like complex biological algorithms, responding predictably to stimuli based on programming installed through their unique combination of cultural indoctrination, family dynamics, traumatic imprints, and biological imperatives. This realization can lead to a profound compassion, yes, but also to an almost unbearable loneliness, as you recognize that genuine communication becomes possible only with others who have similarly begun to wake up from the collective trance. I want to pause for a moment and ask you directly, when did you first realize that your awakening was creating a distance between you and others in your life? That moment when conversations that once felt engaging began to seem like scripted exchanges, when values you previously shared suddenly appeared limited or even harmful, when the social masks that everyone unquestioningly wears became painfully visible to you. I know this experience can create a wounding kind of solitude. You witness people you love moving through life with a kind of sleepwalking certainty, taking their thoughts as absolute truth, their cultural conditioning as objective reality, their limited identity as their total being. And what makes this especially difficult is not simply their inability to see what you see, but the recognition that any attempt to directly challenge their perception will likely be met with resistance, fear, or outright rejection. I want you to know that this phase of isolation, while painful, is both necessary and temporary. Your evolving consciousness is not separating you permanently from humanity, but is instead forging new capacities for connection that will eventually transcend the limitations of conventional human relatedness. And that is why I invite you to share your experience in the comments below. You can simply complete this phrase: I realized my awakening was creating distance when, by sharing this, you not only validate your own journey, but you create a thread of connection with countless others moving through similar terrain, often believing they are entirely alone in their experience. Your words might be precisely the confirmation someone else needs to continue forward on their path, trusting that the current isolation is not the final destination. This global community of awakening beings is largely invisible in physical reality, but becomes tangible when we risk authenticity and vulnerable expression. Each honest sharing strengthens the morphic field of expanded awareness that is gradually redefining what it means to be human in this pivotal evolutionary moment. Now let us venture deeper into understanding the paradoxical nature of this awakening process, where increased separation eventually gives way to a more authentic form of connection. What we initially experience as isolation is actually a necessary purification of our relational capacity. Think of it as learning to see without distortion. When cataracts are removed from eyes long accustomed to clouded vision, the initial clarity can be painful, overwhelming, even disorienting. Similarly, as the cataracts of cultural conditioning and egoic identification begin to dissolve from your perception, your vision of reality becomes both clearer and initially more isolating. This clarity disrupts the comfortable illusion that you truly understood others or were understood by them through the conventional modes of human connection. What previously passed for intimacy now reveals itself as largely a projection, a mutual exchange of conditioned responses, needs seeking satisfaction, and egos seeking validation. The social contracts that once seemed to connect you to others now appear as elaborate systems of mutual reinforcement, designed primarily to maintain collective illusions rather than to facilitate genuine meeting between souls. This realization can initially plunge you into a dark night of relatedness, where all previous forms of human connection seem shallow, performative, or rooted in unconscious patterns rather than authentic presence. You may find yourself withdrawing from relationships that once seemed essential, reducing your social engagements, or feeling an aversion to the kinds of conversations and activities that previously constituted your social life. Many misinterpret this phase as evidence of spiritual superiority, developing a subtle contempt for those still embedded in conventional consciousness. But this is a dangerous trap, as it merely substitutes one form of ego identification for another, exchanging the social ego for the spiritual ego, which can be even more subtle and pernicious. The true invitation of this phase is neither withdrawal nor superiority, but rather a fundamental transformation in how you understand the very nature of human connection. What is dissolving is not your capacity for relationship, but rather the unconscious expectations, projections, and attachments that previously defined your relationships. You are being emptied of the old paradigm of connection in order to become available to a new, more authentic mode of relatedness that can only emerge once the old structures have been sufficiently dismantled. Consider that what we typically call human connection in our pre-awakened state might be more accurately described as a complex system of interlocking needs, fears, and conditioned responses. We connect primarily through our personas, those carefully constructed self-images designed to elicit specific responses from others and to protect our core vulnerabilities. These connections, while better than complete isolation, are fundamentally limited by their inability to include the totality of who we are, especially those aspects that transgress social norms or threaten the comfortable narratives that maintain our sense of identity and security. As awakening proceeds, you begin to sense the possibility of a more comprehensive form of connection, one that emerges not from need or fear, but from the natural expression of your authentic being, in resonance with the authentic being of another. This mode of connection requires neither agreement nor similarity, neither the satisfaction of needs nor the validation of self-image. It asks only for the courage to be fully present to your own experience while remaining open to the unfiltered reality of another, without imposing your narrative on their expression or distorting their reality to fit your expectations. This represents a radical reformation of what it means to be in relationship with another human being. It is a shift from connection based on mutual reinforcement of illusions to connection based on mutual recognition of essence. And while this may initially seem like an impossible possible ideal, glimpses of this more authentic mode of relatedness often emerge spontaneously between awakening beings, creating a kind of oasis in the desert of conventional human interaction. The great paradox here is that what initially appears as increased isolation eventually reveals itself as the foundation for more genuine connection. The very process that separates you from unconscious forms of relatedness simultaneously develops your capacity for conscious relationship. The loneliness of awakening is not a permanent condition, but rather a transitional state, a necessary emptying that creates space for a more authentic way of being with others to emerge. This transition rarely proceeds in a linear fashion. More commonly, you will move through cycles of withdrawal and engagement, isolation and connection, as your system integrates each new level of awareness. There will be periods when the gap between your perception and the conventional world feels unbridgeable, followed by surprising moments of deep communion with the most unexpected individuals. There will be times when your loneliness feels crushing, followed by spontaneous experiences of connection so authentic that they make previous relationships seem like mere shadows of genuine human contact. The integration of awakening consciousness into relational life requires immense patience and compassion, both for yourself and for those still embedded in conventional awareness. It requires developing the capacity to translate your insights into language that can be received by those at different stages of the journey, not to convert them to your perspective, but to maintain threads of connection across the perceptual divide. It requires the humility to recognize that awakening is not a destination, but an ongoing process, and that even the most seemingly unconscious person may have access to wisdom that your particular awakening path has not yet revealed to you. Perhaps most challenging is the development of what we might call dual vision in relationships, the ability to simultaneously perceive both the conditioned persona of the other and the unconditioned essence that animates them beyond all social programming. This dual vision allows you to meet people exactly where they are, without expectation that they should be anywhere else in their evolution, while also holding space for the greater possibilities that exist within them, often outside their current self-awareness. This capacity transforms the experience of human relationship from one of perpetual disappointment, as others fail to meet your unconscious expectations, to one of continual discovery, as you learn to perceive and relate to the multidimensional nature of each being you encounter. It allows for a kind of connection that does not demand the other to change in order to be worthy of your attention, but rather welcomes them in their current configuration, while simultaneously seeing beyond it to their essential nature. The loneliness of awakening thus gradually transforms into a solitude that becomes the ground of genuine connection rather than its obstacle. You discover that it is precisely your capacity to be fully present within your own experience, without requiring others to validate or complete it, that enables you to meet others beyond the trance of mutual need and projection. The very independence that initially seems to separate you from others becomes the foundation for a more authentic interdependence, one based not on unconscious attachment, but on conscious communion. This journey from conventional connection through the wilderness of awakening loneliness to the possibility of authentic relationship mirrors the broader spiritual journey from unconscious unity through the necessary separation of individual awakening to conscious reunification with the whole. Just as the drop must first recognize its distinct nature before it can consciously experience its ocean nature, the awakening human must move through the phase of perceived separation before a conscious experience of genuine connection becomes possible. The practical navigation of this territory requires both insight and specific practices. First is the cultivation of discernment regarding the nature of your relationships. Not everyone in your life will be able to meet you in your evolving awareness, and it is neither necessary nor kind to expect this of them. Some relationships will naturally fall away as your priorities and perceptions shift, while others will transform to accommodate your changing consciousness. New connections will emerge, often unexpectedly, with those resonating at compatible frequencies of awareness. Learning to consciously modulate your communication and expression based on the capacity of the listener becomes an essential skill. This is not dishonesty, but rather compassionate translation, recognizing that premature exposure to certain insights can create unnecessary resistance or confusion in those not yet ready to receive them. Like a thoughtful teacher who calibrates the complexity of their instruction to the developmental stage of the student, you learn to share different aspects of your awareness with different individuals based on their readiness to receive. The cultivation of communities and connections with fellow awakening beings becomes increasingly important. These relationships provide both mirror and validation for your experience, helping to ground insights that might otherwise remain abstract or unstable. They create containers where the new consciousness can be collectively explored and expressed, generating emergent wisdom that transcends what any individual might access alone. Whether through in-person gatherings, online communities, or spiritual organizations, these conscious connections serve as crucial bridges during the transitional phases of awakening. Equally important is the development of a direct relationship with the intelligence of life itself, cultivating the recognition that you are never truly alone because you exist in constant communion with the living field of awareness that constitutes reality. This relationship with the conscious universe provides a foundation of connection that remains stable regardless of the fluctuations in your human relationships, anchoring you in the recognition of your inherent belongingness to the whole of existence. Trust the process. The loneliness that accompanies awakening is not a punishment, but a purification. It is the necessary emptying of outdated forms of connection to make space for something more authentic to emerge. The very sensitivity that makes you feel isolated now is precisely what will enable you to experience levels of communion that were previously inaccessible to your awareness. The pain of separation is actually the birth contraction of a more comprehensive capacity for love. What emerges through this process is not the end of human connection, but its genuine beginning. Beyond the unconscious merging of pre-personal development, beyond the necessary separation of personal development, lies the conscious communion of transpersonal awareness, where autonomy and unity are no longer experienced as contradictory, but rather as complementary expressions of a reality that transcends and includes both. This is the promise hidden within the loneliness of awakening, the treasure waiting to be discovered beyond the desert of conventional relation. If these reflections on the isolation and eventual reconnection that accompany spiritual awakening have touched something within you, know that your journey, though it may feel solitary, is part of a vast movement of consciousness occurring throughout humanity at this time. The very alienation you experience is evidence of your participation in an evolutionary process that is gradually transforming the nature of human relatedness itself. By subscribing to this channel, you join a community of fellow travelers navigating this terrain of awakening consciousness, sharing insights and support along a path that conventional society provides little guidance for understanding. Each video we create is offered as a point of orientation in a landscape that can often feel disorienting, a confirmation that the experiences arising in your consciousness, however strange or isolating they may seem, are recognized aspects of the awakening journey. We are not here to provide simplistic answers or to promise effortless transformation. We are here to walk alongside you through both the beauty and the difficulty of this process, to validate what conventional wisdom often pathologizes, and to point toward possibilities that exist beyond the current limitations of collective human awareness. If you find yourself increasingly alienated from the consensus reality around you, if conversations that once seemed meaningful now feel hollow, if you perceive dimensions of experience that others seem blind to, this channel offers a sanctuary for your evolving perception. Subscribe and allow yourself to be nourished by reflections that honor both the light and shadow aspects of authentic spiritual development. Together we form a field of resonance that strengthens the emergence of a more conscious humanity, each of us contributing our unique frequency to a symphony of awakening that transcends what any individual could manifest alone. Your simple act of subscribing creates a thread in this tapestry, a quiet affirmation that says, "I am committed to this journey of consciousness, with all its challenges and revelations." And that commitment, in a world that often makes us feel insane for questioning its fundamental assumptions, is a profound act of courage and service to the unfolding of our collective potential.